Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. I have Wayne Johnson. Will be doing the opening prayer. All right, let it push it aside. I know, well, we already broke the table. That's your fault, Georgia.
All right, good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Almighty God, Father of us all, we, your servants, turn to you for your continuance of your blessings upon us. You who have spared us veterans from the grasp of our enemies, grant us the full understanding of your precious comfort. We thank you for the privileges of life and of the blessings we enjoy through your graciousness. In our community, the land in which we were given, and the freedom of speech, religion, and pursuit of happiness, assist us to know who better, and the wisdom to acknowledge you as the God of the universe and of ideal. In your mercy, may we, the living, find our peace. Grant us from above this day the challenge of high endeavor and the beauty of a humble spirit, the strong courage and the will without exertion to continue to glorify you, to praise you, and to love you to the end of time. Amen.
Please be seated. I want to welcome everyone here today. My name is Justin Latini, the President of Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 207. I am not a combat vet. I am a submarine vet. Some say we had combat, but I don't know. I want to welcome everyone here to our 30th year. This is the 30th year that 207 has been here for the remembrance. We began in the 1992 holding the ceremony at Battleship Cove. We then moved to Kennedy Park, then on to City Hall, and last year we finally came home to the Vietnam Memorial Wall and stand with our brothers who are still missing. I would like to thank the family members who are here today, along with our fellow Vietnam brothers and sisters and all veterans who have joined us here today. To the mayor of the city and other city and other state officials, we thank you for coming by today. And just so you may know, on the wall there is 1,060 members who have a circle next to their name. These are members who are still missing. When the remains are returned, there's a cross. When the remains are returned, the circle is put back on the cross, letting you know that those remains have been returned. Today, nearly 82,000 service members remain unaccounted for from conflicts dating back to World War II. More than 72,000 were from World War II, 8,000 from Korea, and 1,600 remain unaccounted from the Vietnam War. Today, we recognize all POWs and MIAs, but especially those here in Massachusetts from the Vietnam War, which we will read the names later in the program. At this time, I would like to bring up Fall River's Veteran Service Director, Michaela Brito.
Good afternoon. Greetings from the city of Fall River, and I'd like to welcome all of you who've not been to our beautiful city before, to this beautiful wall behind us. You are not forgotten. That's the central phrase behind the POW-MIA Remembrance Movement that honors America's prisoners of wars and those who are still missing in action and their families. 43 years ago, Congress and the President passed a resolution making the third Friday of September POW-MIA Recognition Day. The point of POW-MIA Recognition Day is to ensure that Americans remember to stand behind those who served and to make sure that we do everything that we can to account for those who never returned. Many of our service members suffered as prisoners of war during several decades of varying conflicts. Some of them made it home, tens of thousands never did. of those, 725 Vietnam War service members were imprisoned, with 64 of them who died. It is for these reasons that we are here today, to honor and recognize these service members, but most importantly, to let their families know that their loved ones are not forgotten.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Now I'd like to bring on honored speaker, Mayor Paul Coogan, Fall River.
Thank you, Justin. I also want to acknowledge a few people that joined us here today. Our state representatives, Paul Schmidt and Carol Fiola, our housing director, Kevin Spardella, and of course, Charlie Denmead, who helps to get all these events set up for the DCM. I want to thank everyone for joining us at POW MIA Recognition Day. It's an honor to recognize the men and women who served and sacrificed to keep the United States safe. I would also like to acknowledge those families of our missing soldiers, and of course, we wait with you. We must take this time to remember the sacrifice the soldiers and their families paid, because as we all know, the cost of freedom is felt by more than just the men and women in arms. Their loved ones experience a very unique type of grief that many of us will never, ever know. They struggle with unanswered questions every day to this day, and we remind them that we do stand with them. So we should all remember the efforts of our American men and women who were missing in action, who became prisoners of war, because without them, we would not be here today. God bless our former prisoners of war, our soldiers missing in action, and all their families. And of course, God bless the United States of America. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Today I have the honor to introduce Fred Perryton, Lieutenant Commander, U.S. Navy, who was interned as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam after he was shot down in October 1966 and was held until his release of February 1973. Commander Perryton's captors, completely ignoring international agreements, subject him to extreme mental and physical cruelties in an attempt to obtain information in false confession for the propaganda purposes. Through his resistance to those brutalities, he contributed significantly toward the eventual abandonment of these harsh treatment by the Vietnamese, which was attracting international attention. By his determination, courage, resourcefulness, and devotion, Lieutenant Commander Perryton reflected great credit upon himself and held the highest traditions of the United Naval Service and the United States Armed Forces. This time I would like to welcome Fred.
How do you hear me out there? Loud and clear? All the Vietnam vets, please raise your hand. Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Justin and his crew here that have put this wall in place in this entire park. It's an amazing accomplishment. And it can't have happened without some real strong leadership, which I'm sure he's provided, and the donations that must have come in here in the form of labor. And I asked him today how many veterans organizations, contracts, etc., came out here to work for you, and he told me in the great numbers, and that's what built this wall. Now this wall is something very unique. Yes, it has the names of those that died in Vietnam and some who died after Vietnam. But really what it is, to me, it's a healing wall. There's been an incredible amount of healing accomplished by visiting that wall. I can look out here and I see a couple of guys that I rode motorcycles down there in part of Rolling Thunder. And by the way, Rolling Thunder came from the name that was given to the operations in North Vietnam up through 1968. Rolling Thunder was the period that I flew in North Vietnam. And I never got the opportunity to fly down south because they had moved us all the way north automatically when I got over there. But these trips that I have made, riding to the wall with the guys, I've seen so many guys, and some of the most badass guys you want to see, put their hand up on that wall and start crying. And that wall is speaking to them, and it's speaking to all of us. And they may be standing there crying, and they may be standing next to the son or the father or mother of the guy whose name's there. So it's much more than a mourning. It's a reunification, and it's a very strong healing process. I know it for me. I talked the other night to a very good friend of mine who keeps all the statistics for the NAM Pow organization that I'm a part of, Masher McGrath. Call him Masher because, well, forget that. He's just a tough guy. But he did all the painting and everything that's been seen about the treatment in North Vietnam, how we were treated in, well, the torture portions and that type of thing. But Masher said the same thing to me. He said, whenever I go to the wall, and many weren't really all sold on it when it first was proposed. I know at that time I was the XO at the Naval Academy, and we got things from Ross Perot. And our thinking of it was, well, we didn't like the kind of the subterranean, the way it was, appeared to be subterranean. They were looking for something more combative. But then we came to realize that it was a healing wall. And it's verified time and time again when you see people there visiting. And it's the reunion of reunions when you ride down there, because there are thousands, hundreds of thousands that show up on the Saturday and the Sunday before Memorial Day. With all the bikes that I've ridden with, we would line up in the Pentagon parking lot, and it would be 3 hours before the last bike finished going around, coming across the Potomac and then coming in behind the Lincoln Memorial and riding around the wall. It would take them 3 hours to complete that process. But in the meantime, everybody's standing on the ground, meeting each other, shaking hands, having a wonderful time, and in reunion. In reunion. So that might be a little different take, because we leave there on the 31st, on Memorial Day we leave, and then there comes a memorial service at the wall. There's been 300, 400,000, maybe even 500,000 there 2 days before. And on that day, they got maybe 3,500 at the Memorial Day service. Not quite the same turnout. Now, my experience, MIA, POW, yes. I was an MIA for 3 years. I was a POW for 2,313 days, but who's counting? 6.5 years approximately. How did I get there? Well, I started out going to school at New Bedford Tech over there in New Bedford. It came time to take, what are you going to do when you get out of school? A lot of guys were going up and taking the exams for OCS in Newport. I said, why not? So I went up. I took the exams. There were guys standing there in tweed suits from Harvard, MIT, and other places. And I'm sitting there in a sweater. My father, who was a medic in World War II, drove me up. And I'm sitting there, and the chief gives us the exams to take, and we take it, and then the chief takes it back, and he sits down and grades them. And when he gets to the end of the grading, he says, okay, guys, I'm going to call some names here. And when I call those names, you can come up, and the petty officer right over there will tell you where you can apply again. In other words, they didn't pass the exam. Well, I'm still sitting there, and I'm seeing something's way out of balance here. And he's still sitting there and I can't take it anymore. I always open up my big mouth too fast anyway. That's something I've been blessed with, I guess, in some cases. So I said, well, wait a minute. So I walked up to the chief, and I said, Chief, my name is Perryton. I noticed you read all the names, and I didn't hear mine. And he said, yeah, you passed. God help the United States Navy. So I left. I can't tell you how elated I was to have passed. Went back home, still waiting to graduate from college. And I walked up to, had my final exam to complete. I went up to the library one day when I was supposed to be working on my final paper. And I saw a little book, How to Fly. Yeah, that was more interesting than what I was working on, so I picked it up and I started reading it. And it was a very simple concept. I said, Jesus, I'd like to do that. Well, I had a friend of mine, his name was Noel Hill, and at the time, he was down at Embry-Riddle Flight School, going to school down there. He grew up on Round Hill, the Hetty Green Estate, and his father ran the airport down there. And his father was a great guy. He used to have Noel and I come down and try to get us to study harder, so we had a place to study down there. And Noel had the commitment from his father, if he had spent 1 year at Tech, then he can go off and go fly and do whatever he wanted to do. He'd send him to Embry-Riddle. Well, by the time I was ready to go in the Navy, Noel had come back and was already flying. So I called him up, and he says, yeah, I can teach you how to fly. So I went out to New Bedford Airport with him, and I got a private, no, I didn't get my private, I got a solo license. And so I was into flying at that level. I'll try to move ahead a little bit. I was at Noel's house working, and some Ike Manchester, ran Manchester Sales Off, his son came down, and he said, did you hear the president was assassinated? And we thought he was telling a joke. And he said, no, it's the truth, he was. And then we all went and heard the news of President Kennedy's assassination. The next day was my day to report for duty, the day after Kennedy was assassinated, and I reported into OCS. Went through OCS, took another exam in OCS then because I realized I was going the wrong way. At OCS, I'm glad they have all those tests as multiple choice because I must be a good guesser. I passed the aviation tests to become a pilot in Pensacola. Couldn't believe it. Had to go before a board of 3 or 4 aviators, and they asked me questions of what I knew about flying. And I said, they said, well, I said, well, I already fly, you know. I go, oh, Eddie Rickenbacker, huh? I said, no, I have flown. I've got my solo license. And they said to me, they asked me the question, oh, okay, then what do you know about naval aircraft? What's the engine that's in the A-1? I thought for a minute. I said, it's the same one in the DC-3. They didn't know whether it was or not. So they looked at each other, looked back at me and said, is that right? And I said, yeah, that's right. I know it's right. So when I don't know, sometime later, we're all going up to see when the results are posted on the board, who's been accepted to flight training. I couldn't believe it. I went up there and I was. I tell you, was I happy? Oh, okay, you got to get out. Give me a break. So then I went down and reported into Pensacola. Started flying. Started flying on the day that Everett Alvarez was shot down over Vietnam, and that was August 5th 1964. Deb and I are good friends today. But did it mean anything? Where was Vietnam? Someplace, someplace, near China, or Korea, or something. And then I left and went off to fly. Got pretty good flight grades, but I was really planning on being an airline pilot. And so they offered me jets if you had the good flight grades, and I turned them down. I said, no, I want to be an airline pilot. And so I continued, flew the T-28s, and then we got into the fun flying in the T-28. Instead of flying jets, I was flying this big prop, manned formation flying. And then when I got the carrier quals, I carrier qualled on the Roosevelt. Eventually, the Roosevelt's the ship I went to Vietnam on, and I'm totally hooked. I mean, and then I finished there, and oh my God, I made a mistake. I should have gone jets. So I go for my out meeting with the skipper of the squadron, and he said, hey, nice job, you got good grades and everything. I said, yeah, but I made a mistake. I want to fly jets. How do I do that? And he says, well, I can tell you give you one piece of advice, because the advanced training was all done in Corpus Christi, Texas, when we were moving from there. He says, go down there and don't take no for an answer. I said, okay. So I went down there and went into student control with a bunch of my other buddies that I all know that were finishing up at that time. Saw the detailer there. No, really, he wasn't the detailer. He was the second-class petty officer sitting there. And he was going to take my papers. And he said, well, where are you going? And I said, well, where do I go to check in for jets? And he said, oh, you got to go upstairs. So I went upstairs, sitting upstairs and waiting. Took a magic marker out. There were two choices, Kingsville or Beeville. Select which one you want to go to. I put Kingsville because you get to Liberty faster in Corpus Christi from Kingsville than you would from Beeville. So bang, I sign up and I sit down with the other guys who I haven't seen since pre-flight. I don't really know them. They're coming from jets. And this guy, Larry Lamb, the detailer down there, comes out. And he says, where's Perryton? I said, right here, sir. He said, get in here. I went in and sat down. He says, what are you pulling? What are you pulling here? And I said, sir? He said, what are you pulling? This is for jets. You've been flying T-28s. I said, yes, sir, but I want to fly jets. He says, you do. He says, you think you can think it's 6 miles a minute instead of 3, what you've been flying? I said, well, I can try hard. He says, well, I'm going to tell you something. He said, have you ever heard of Everett Alvarez? And I said, yeah, isn't he that guy that got shot down over in Vietnam? And he says, yeah. Well, if I send you jets, you might get to meet him. What do you think of that? And I said, well, it's in the game, it's in the game. So he said, I tell you what, you look like you shine your shoes with something besides a wire brush, so I'm going to send you to Kingsville. And that's what he did. Sent me out to Kingsville, Texas. I started flying the F9F, first jet, finished the program, graduated, completed, got my orders to Jacksonville for A4 training, went through the RAG, did okay. Went on, was assigned to my first squadron, which was VA 72, and we were leaving June 21st of 1966 for Vietnam. And my mother and parents were, my father and mother were from up here. I had a grandmother, 88, that lived with us, the matriarch of the family, the taskmaster, tougher than nails. Sent me to get a job when I went to grammar school, first grade. I go to grammar school, and she says, well, now you got to get a job. And I said, first grade? Yeah. Go to work for Grace Neal up there, emptying her buckets, stuff, garbage. So that was Nana. And she was the matriarch for the neighborhood. But in any case, I don't want to get lost here. But I was going off to Vietnam, We all knew it. We were training hard, flying a lot, and just before we went, my family came down. Nana, Mom, Dad, my sister, and my father being an ex-Navy guy, petty officer, second class. He was somewhat leery about walking around the spaces he was walking around there and the hangars and everything else, and he didn't want to violate any rules or regulations. Well, most of us by that time, knowing where we were going, there weren't many regulations left. We were just going full speed ahead. So they came down and visited me, and I flew the airplanes out to Mayport, Florida, to be loaded aboard the Roosevelt. That morning, my mother came out, and father and Nana, and they were invited on the hangar deck for a bit of a party, like a going away, just a ceremonial send-off. And they were walking around. I was talking to my mother and introducing her to the other guys. And then they said, "Oh, pilots to the ready room." That's what I thought I heard. So I said, "Hey, you got to get off the ship. See you later when I get back." Well, they looked at me kind of startled. I went back to the ready room, and no, I didn't have to do it. I didn't have to come in that early. So I went back up on the flight deck, and here's where the laws of three come in. And I was stood up on the flight deck, looking down, and there was my mother, my father, my sister, and my grandmother, all standing down there. And she was looking up at three guys. Myself, Norm Bundy, and Ray Otten. And, you know, they told us, take a look at the guy on your right and the guy on the left. You may have heard this one. And only one of you will be left remaining. So what happened? First line period, Norm Bundy was killed. He's on the wall. What happened? To me, I got shot down. I was missing in action, as I say, for 3 years. The other guy, Ray Orton, he went on. He flew with the airlines. My wife was an airline flight attendant for Delta. And by the way, she had been the one that visited my family all the time when I was gone. I had a date with her before we went overseas, and can't tell you how much I owe that lady, because she was there regularly. And people get scarce in those type of situations. Nobody was knocking down the doors to see my mother and father. She was. Bang. I'm in prison. Got shot down on my 29th mission. I had a skipper, Bruce Nystrom, who had flown in Korea, 67 missions. And he was a good man. He was tough. He was a tough taskmaster. I can remember my getting ready to fly with him prior to getting to Vietnam. And man, he was grilling me like he couldn't believe. I'm sitting up there in the front of the ready room, listening to him. What's martial altitude? What's the low martial? What's this? What's this? What's that? What's that? We're getting ready to fly at night. And finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the back of the ready room. I said, "I've had it. Hey, skipper." And I walked to the back of the ready room. He came up. And he said, "Hey, you know why you're doing this? You know why I'm doing this to you?" He says, "I got to get you ready early." I said, "Well, yeah, you don't have to get me killed tonight, though." We were getting ready to launch off the ship. And he kind of smiled. Sometime later, I was honored because we had some new guys join the squadron while we were en route. One of them's name was Paul Worrell. And the skipper said to them one day, "Go back and talk to Fred. He knows what I want." Ah, man, what a compliment. Again, we go back, we go into port in Japan, we come back out to fly. It's October 18th, 1966. We're out there about to begin to resume missions. This fellow named Dale Content is a duty officer. And I go down on the evening of the 19th, and I don't see my name on the board to fly. And in fact, I'm supposed to fly with a guy named Gail Thompson. And this guy who's a duty officer, Dale Content, who went on to fly with Delta Airlines and my wife, has got himself in that slot. And so the mouth opens up. Hey, what the hell is going on here, Dale? You got yourself scheduled my flight. No, I don't. Yeah, you do. There's no doubt about it. You got to change it. And the operations officer comes by and we're screaming, what are you guys doing? I said, hey, he's got himself in this. He looked at it, he said, okay, Dale, give it to Fred. Well, next morning I get in for the launch and I'm taxiing forward. And the reason I didn't want it, because I knew they'd put me on rest cap, which means you're sitting in an airplane for hours up there trying to stay cool. And I go by and there's Dale Content, Sid Linton, and they're standing the rest cap mission. So I flipped him the international signal, which you're all familiar with, taxied forward, launched, and this is, as Dan LeBlanc can attest, I call him my one-armed Marine, because he's one of the greatest servants of the Marine, the veterans in this area, has been for a long time. And we all know him. And he was over there the same time I was, and he can attest to the weather sucked. And it was a bad weather day, and we launched, and we went into the beach, and sure enough, we were heading up the river, and I knew we were going too far up. I said, hey, let's hit those barges down in the river. We tried to rolled in, I got hit, and wound up on the ground. And that's when I say, the war doesn't start till your feet get on the ground. And that sure started the war for me. Immediately, I was coming down in my parachute, and I looked at my right hand, and I had my New Bedford Tech ring on. And I pulled the ring off and threw it away, and I said to myself, they'll never find out where I went to school. Yeah? They never will. Well, I landed, saw a tree, thought I was going to hit the tree. And the other story about there's 100 from the right and 100 from the left is true. Here they come, all along the dike on this. They grabbed me, packed me up. I went through a series of interrogations and things like that. They wrap you up right away, but not bad. But you lose the feeling in your hands, but they just got your hands tied behind your back. They haven't played rough stuff yet. And I went on that whole day at different spots. Later on in the afternoon, it seemed like it was a clam bake going on. I could hear. They had me blindfolded in a hut, and it seemed like what it was a hate rally going on. And there had been a guy came in that was pushed inside of me across from where I was, and they took him out first. Heard the hate rally, and I had been looking for a guy named Robert Dean Woods. I even mentioned he was shot down in that area. And I thought, well, that's Woods. I'll catch him when we get to into the big camps, like the German camps where everybody gets together. Well, that wasn't quite the way it was. They let him out. They let me out. They had a blindfolded on me after I stood up there and took the spits and everything else. And they had a Vietnamese girl leading me by a hawser around my neck. And she led me right out to where I fell into what I thought was a grave. I hit it and I said, oh, Jesus, this is it. Hit the grave, and I was laying in the grave. They had rifles out. They didn't shoot. They pulled me out, put me on a truck, took me to Hanoi. This guy was on the truck part of the way, and then he left. I subsequently found out in 1996, his name was Harry Edwards Sather. He was from Carolina, and his body came home in 1996. He never made it into the POW camp. I got there. You arrive, and this is at the Hanoi Hilton now, which is a big dungeon, a castle, French dungeon, Maison Central on the door. Push it down. Then they take you into a room. They took me into a room called the Nobby Room, which we later called the Nobby Room. I didn't know where the hell I was. And they proceeded to work you over. Now, I went over there. The skipper had asked me one time, he said, what are you going to tell them if you get shot down and you're taken into prison? And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean, what am I going to tell them? It's name, rank, service number, and date of birth. And what I was taught at survival school, you could even say 02, because I was a Lieutenant JG at the time, instead of saying Lieutenant JG. That way they might not know what service you went to. And you're bound to give them only name, rank, service number, and date of birth. Nothing else. It wasn't a soft code of conduct. It was a tough code of conduct. So that's what I tried to do, like everybody else. And maybe after 5 hours in what we call the road trip, which basically your elbows tied behind your back in manacles and then pulled up over your head and your legs in leg irons. And they just keep putting the pressure on until you're screaming. And I don't know how long. Some say might last 4 hours, 5 hours. I don't think I lasted that long, 4 hours. They take you out of them. So, okay, you talk. They start talking, and I say, I can't answer that. Can't answer that question. Okay, you get iron discipline again. Back in that for another session. That went on most of the night. Next day, the interrogations continued. Had one more session of it. Same result. But I haven't signed any confessions yet. That's what they want. They want to break. In 1966, they had their Welcome Aboard program together. They knew what they were going to do when you came in. Earlier, they were kind of making it up as they went. Well, this was no makeup. They knew what they were doing. Right away, they gave you the reception program. That's what it consisted of. Break you down, and you trying to rely on the code of conduct. So I went through a number of interrogations looking for the confession. By the time it came to confessions, my hands were so swollen up I couldn't use them. So they had to write the confession. They didn't have any problem. I was still beaten. I might as well have written it. And they took my hand and scribbled something on there that I wrote it. And I was left to my own devices a couple of days. Then a couple of days they move you to what is the Heartbreak Hotel section. It was an 8-room cell. And when I was in there, they had leg irons, but they didn't put them on tight. They were locked down, not tight, but you were locked down. But I looked over the first morning, I woke up and I thought I was looking at a rabbit, and it wasn't a rabbit, it was a rat eating what was put on the rack next to me. Stayed there. Went on for, whew. Well, I was shot down October 20th. I was moved some weeks later to a camp we call the Zoo. Won't go in it. It's 5 miles southwest of the Hanoi Hilton. It was a name that was popular for a lot of years, but the Zoo, everybody wound up there generally at one time. However, on the way over to the Zoo from the Hanoi Hilton, I was strapped in the back of a Jeep. My hand could touch a guy next to me, and he squeezed my hand, just saying, like, it's going to be okay, buddy. And that guy was Ross Terry and Nels Tanner. They'd been an F4 team. They went to the Zoo. I didn't see him again for a long time. I went to the Zoo. I moved into the room in the barn. And I didn't have the tap code. That was the thing that usually, if you tried to get the tap code, a 5x5 matrix, American Football League Quo Vadis down the side, and a B would be tapped and two taps. Row, column. Anyway, that was the basis of the code. I didn't have it. I tried tapping on the wall, banging on the wall to the guys next to us. Somebody answered. And he knew I didn't have the tap code just by the way I was tapping on the wall. So he tried Morse code, and I could come back with a little bit of it. And we communicated trying that. And I got his name as Al something, C, long name. And then the next morning, it dawned on me. I said, can't be. I was on the ship with Al Carpenter. He was an LSO. I was in an LSO in training. And it couldn't be him. I waited all night. When the first light came, I got on and said, tapped to him. And I said, are you Al Carpenter? And he said, hi, Fred. And I had been going through interrogations with V. I know I'm going long, but I'm going to go long, okay? I have to. You got me here, you got me started. So I couldn't believe it was Al Carpenter. I had had interrogation the day before, and in that interrogation, he told me, we're going to put you in a pit, small hole, and bury you and not let you out. You're the blackest of criminals. Well, the next morning they came in, roll up your bag. And stuff, and go. And I went for interrogation thinking this is it. I walked in, the guy we called a rabbit, he said, do you know what today is? And I said, yeah. He said, well, you don't look too happy. You should be happy. And I thought to myself, yeah, I guess I should be happy. I'm going to get out of here one way or another. And he said, no, wait a minute. He got up and left. And he comes back in, and he's got a guy in striped pajamas with him. His name is Doug Burns. He's the lieutenant commander. And Doug says to me, he says, hey, how you doing? I was all still bandaged up. I said, don't talk to me. He says, wait a minute. He said, what do you think I am? You think I'm a traitor? I said, just don't talk to me. I don't want to talk to anybody. He says, I'm not a traitor. Well, they led us back to the room in the stable. And in that room, the walls opened up. There was tapping on the walls. Doug was communicating with all these guys. I'm in the system, and I didn't realize it. And these guys were all great guys, like you guys. Welcome aboard. That was when I felt welcome aboard. And I won't carry on much longer. But how did I get home? Okay, I'll tell you how I got home. And did I have a better homecoming than you guys had? You better believe I had a better homecoming than you guys had. And I'm going to tell you the high points of that, and then I'm going to get off the stage.
Yeah, like you deserve.
Well, we all deserve a good homecoming. And so the homecoming came, we resisted it, not going to go, boom, boom, boom. We're the second group. We saw the first group go. I knew all the guys. I was next in line anyway. And they left. And then we got calls from our SRO. And certain one of us got called out. There were 18 of us that were called out. And we were told by the senior ranking officer in our room, who had met with Colonel Gaddis, the camp SRO, and believe me, rank has his privilege. It didn't have it there. That's who they went for first, the senior guys. Denton, Reisner, God love them. Man, they took more crap. But anyway, he said, you ought to form up and leave the camp. They're going to meet you and lead you to the other side of the camp. And we're saying, Arv, what the hell's the story? This is crazy. Nope, you guys are going out. I'm ordering you out. So we went to the other side of the camp. We were in a place called New Guy Village section. It wasn't happening. We got upset. Our senior ranking officer was Jim Perry, who flew out of Weymouth Air Force Base as a reserve years ago. Great guy. We said, Jim, we don't like it. We don't like it. We don't want to go. Tell them we're not going. We're not going to go. Tell them to take us back to the other side. We got in touch. I won't tell you the means of communication. It was crazy. It was a potato in the soup to the other side. We knew they were serving it over there. We put a message in that. And Perry got the message in the next potato in his plate. So it went directly to him. And they say, yeah, we agree with you. Ask them to bring you back. So we went back. We went back to the side of the camp. Time goes by. They still say you guys are going. We had a Vietnamese general come to our cell, tell us what was going on, tell us how you guys are just screwing up the entire Paris Accords and all that stuff. And you gotta change your way, and you gotta go. That's all. We're going to reverse the relations with your government and our government, and that was all to do with the Paris peace talks. And we still said, we told him, we're not going. So we're supposed to go the next morning, and the next morning, I'm sitting there, and I look out into the center of the camp, and here comes this full-bird Air Force colonel with members of what was the International Joint Commission that was in there, and he's out in the middle of the camp, and they take Jim Peary out to talk with him. And we had always said we want the direct orders of the President of the United States if we're going to go. And that's what Jim would always tell him. So he went out, and in the middle of the camp, here's this colonel, and he says, I'm the direct representative of the President of the United States. And you would come with me, and we're going to Guy Lime, and we're taking you guys home. And all of a sudden, we saw Jim Peary say something to him, and they got all upset. And the colonel and the international committee guys, the joint international, whatever they called, they left, and Jim came back to the cell, and we're sitting there. He's not even in a cell. He said, Jim, what the hell did you tell him? He said he was Colonel Larson, a direct representative of the President of the United States, and he was here to take us home, and at the direct orders of the President of the United States. And we said, well, so what? sounds good to me. You know, and Perry said, we said, Perry, what'd you tell him? He said, I told him, over in that corner room is Norman Earl Gaddis, Colonel, Air Force. He is the senior ranking officer here. You have him come over to us and tell us we're out of, get out of camp. And that's what they did. And I stood there right in front of Norm Gaddis, and he said, well, I'm going to tell you guys, you did all you can do. I'm ordering you home. So bang, we went out to Guy Lam Airport, loaded on a 141, Air Force nurses, most beautiful things I'd ever seen. And our next question is, will this airplane get off the beach? When you want to get feet wet. When we turned feet wet, we were heading for the Philippines. And feet wet, cheers went up on the airplane. I'll end it here. We landed in the Philippines. Everything was fine. But you went by the debriefing. And my mother had died, my father had died. My father had written me a letter when he knew I was coming home. And who was always with my family? My present wife. Maggie. Everybody's Maggie. Flight attendant, and my savior. Thank you.
Sorry about that. I'll get you some water. Thank you very much. At this time, we're going to move right to the closing ceremony. We're going to read the list of names from Massachusetts who are still MIAs. Richard Benavides.
Bruce R. Baxter.
Missing in action, sir.
Eugene P. Bezarek.
Missing in action, sir.
Kenneth A. Berraby.
Missed in action, sir.
Warren Bowles.
Missing in action, sir.
Russell P. Bott.
Missing in action, sir.
Deverton C. Cochran.
Missing in action, sir.
Joseph P. Dunn.
Missing in action, sir.
John S. Earls.
Missing in action, sir.
William D. Frawley.
Missing in action, sir.
Roger C. Gorn.
Missing in action, sir.
Richard Graves.
Missing in action, sir.
Joseph G. Greenleaf.
Missing in action, sir.
Richard Hopper.
Missing in action, sir.
Robert D. Hauer.
Missing in action, sir.
John R. Henn.
Missing in action, sir.
Henry H. Herron.
Missing in action, sir.
David H. Holmes.
Missing in action, sir.
Daniel M. Kelly.
Missing in action, sir.
Paul C. King.
Missing in action, sir.
Gerald Kinsman.
Missing in action, sir.
Michael J. Cousington.
Missing in action, sir.
John M. Lever.
Missing in action, sir.
Don McHale.
Missing in action, sir.
James A. Magnuson.
Missing in action, sir.
Arthur V. McLaughlin.
Missing in action, sir.
Charlton Miller.
Missing in action, sir.
Richard G. Moran.
Missing in action, sir.
William F. Mullen.
Missing in action, sir.
John F. Overlock.
sir.
John R. Painter Jr.,
Missing in action, sir.
Edward F. Rogers,
Missing in action, sir.
James J. Sansone,
Missing in action, sir.
William M. Smith,
Missing in action, sir.
Martin J. Sullivan,
Missing in action, sir.
Robert J. Todd,
Missing in action, sir.
Orrin J. Walker Jr.,
Missing in action, sir.
Manek Wirtz,
Missing in action, sir. Just take that with you, Richard. Take that with you. At this time, I'd like to bring back the chaplain, Wayne Johnson, for the closing prayer, and then we will be laying the wreath at the wall.
Heavenly Father, the table is set in our post home in memory of our brothers who answered the call of you. Dear Lord, against the tyranny of mankind, we ask you to send them understanding, love, hope, reclassification, that we, veterans, have not forgotten them and continue to work for their accounting and return. Amen. For our brothers forever missing, may they reside in your in your kingdom. For our brothers still held in captivity, may your light of truth guide them and keep them whole for the families wanting their resolve. May they understand and find in your inner peace these things we ask in your name. Amen.
Fred, do you want to lay the wreath with me?
And salute. 2.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming out today. This concludes the 2022 POWMAI event. Thank you very much.